Hello, I'm Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for The Verdict. As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers, and also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett. Well, this week's show deals with the highly controversial topic of congressional redistricting. And let me introduce one of Oklahoma's top legal experts and my co-host, Kent Myers. Kent, this strikes at the very heart of our Constitution.
It does. It's a subject, you're right, it's very controversial. It's something that we must deal with as a nation every 10 years, whether we want to or not, and then usually after we deal with it, we decide we don't want to, but we have to. And it's based generally on the shifting of population within our country. Some states stay the same, some grow, some lose. And of course, in our U.S. House of Representatives, that is done based upon proportional representation by population. Congressional redistricting obviously does not affect the U.S. Senate. Our Oklahoma legislature draws the bill to determine what the congressional districts are going to be, and then it's signed or not signed by the governor, as the case may be. But it's just like any other bill coming through the legislature, but has enormous implications. Our legislature will return on September 7th for a one-day special session to deal with this, among other subjects. How they're going to get all this done in one day, I'm not quite sure. But I want to take just a minute in this opening segment to put a graphic up of the map of the United States, because it will show how states did in this last 2000 census. The blue states are states that actually gained congressional seats, and we've got them labeled congressional winners in the sense. Some gained 1 seat, some gained 2 seats. No state gained more than two seats. The yellow states were the losers. They lost 1 seat. And the white states stayed the same. But you'll notice, Mick, that in the southern United States there are only 2 states that lost seats, Oklahoma and Mississippi. The other states losing seats are up in the Midwest and Northeast. And of course our neighbor states, and particularly in the Sun Belt, all gained. Oklahoma lost.
And the drawing of lines actually can increase or decrease the chance of a party winning a seat or an individual candidate.
Well, yes. It's always done by our state legislature that is made up right now of Democrats and Republicans, and sometimes they have differing views on how that ought to turn out. There's been much speculation that we're entering into, on September 7th, a game of musical chairs. You remember musical chairs. You start with, you end up with 1 less chair than you have people in the game, and somebody's left standing. The question that we'll try to deal with on this show is, which congressional representative is going to be left standing?
Should be very interesting. It's congressional redistricting. It should be a lively discussion, and we'll get to it right here on The Verdict.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an Allied artist.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Leaving it 4th and 7 on the Tiger 46-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go for it. Wiggins in to do the kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
All children deserve a life of hope and love. But sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
And welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and we're ready to discuss the issue of congressional redistricting. Kent, why don't you introduce our guests?
Our guests are probably the two people that know as much about it as anyone in the state of Oklahoma. On my left is the Honorable Loyd Benson, former Speaker of the House of the state of Oklahoma, a representative from Frederick for many years. Loyd has won many awards in the course of his service, but most recently, he was chairman of the House Congressional Redistricting Committee, a longtime friend. Loyd, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
On my right is Mike Hunter, the Honorable Mike Hunter, Secretary of State of the state of Oklahoma. Mike was a former Chief of Staff for Congressman J.C. Watts. He himself served in the House of Representatives for 7 to 8 years as a Republican, and has been deeply involved in the planning for the congressional redistricting as well. Mr. Secretary of State, thank you very much.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Loyd, we lost a seat because of the 2000 census. What's your take on what has happened in Oklahoma that makes us, like Mississippi, in the posture of losing a seat rather than staying even or gaining a seat?
Well, Ken, I think you have to look at the history of what happened insofar as demographics are concerned. You look back to the fact that the statehood, Oklahoma had 5 seats. We gained to as many as 9 seats in 1932, but since 1950 we've had 6 seats. For the last 50 years we've had 6 congressmen. The only time during the last 50 years we've had a population growth in excess of the national average is during the 70s or the late 70s when we had the tremendous oil boom. Our population increase was over 18% during that time, and the average national growth was about 12%. During the 80s, our population growth was 4.4%, and the national rate was 9.7%. When you look at the 90s, we really weren't that far off of the national average. We had a 9.7% growth rate during the 90s, and the national rate was 13.2%. So what happened is we were less than 10,000 people from losing a congressman in 2001, the last time we redistricted. The fact that we lost one this time by less than 100,000 population is an indicator of the fact that other states just grew faster than the national average. And a real important statistic from a demographic standpoint is the fact that Texas drew, I think, at 22%, New Mexico at about 21%, Arizona at 40%, California at almost 14%, Nevada at 66%. But one of the things that all those states had in common, with the exception of Nevada, is they're bordering Mexico. The counties that bordered Mexico had a growth rate of their Hispanic population of 21%, which is almost twice the annual population. So when you look at those issues and the fact that Oklahoma's Hispanic population doubled during the 1990s, but our population from the Hispanic community was much less than it was in those states. So I think you have to look at those issues when you're trying to just figure out why we're losing a congressman in the year 2001.
Mike, what do you think?
Well, Speaker Benson's factual summation was accurate. That's as fair a summary as I've heard of why we're where we are today. I think a lot of folks have the impression that we lost population. As Loyd said, we actually gained almost 10%. We just didn't keep up with a lot of the other areas of the country that grew more rapidly.
My understanding is that western Oklahoma did, in fact, lose like 32,000 population.
That's correct.
And I guess that means that the central and eastern grew at a greater rate than they normally would have in order to make the loss not any greater than it was. Well,
an interesting point, Ken, is the fact that the metropolitan areas around Oklahoma City and Tulsa all gained population, but the other counties that gained significant population were adjacent to one of the lake recreational areas.
The congressional redistricting is, of course, done by the, at least initially, by the state legislature in the form of a bill. And I want to look at a graphic that shows the political lineup in Oklahoma in 2001 as compared to what it was in 1991. Of course, we have a Republican governor now. We have in the state Senate a much closer margin for the Democrats than what it was in 91. The state House is getting almost equal. We have 2 Republican senators, U.S. senators, and we have now 5 Republican congressmen as opposed to just 2 10 years ago. Mike, the political lineup in Oklahoma just in this decade has turned in what I would call decidedly toward the Republican Party. What accounts for that?
Well, it's really been an evolutionary process. I think you can start seeing in the 60s, 2 Republican governors were elected, and then beginning in the 60s and moving through the 70s and 80s and 90s, you saw Oklahoma being a very competitive state at the top of the ticket for Republican candidates, particularly Republican presidential candidates. 94 was the big watershed year for Republicans. We won a number of statewide offices, swept the congressional delegation. I think the trend is pretty clear, and what we're seeing now is the tendency of Oklahoma voters to support Republican candidates at the top of the ticket is now moving on more of a comprehensive basis so that it affects legislative candidates.
Loyd, what do you think about that, about the dramatic shift in 10 years?
Well, I think that when you look at where the growth has been in Oklahoma, it's been around the metropolitan areas, and that's where the Republicans have been able to strengthen their numbers in the Tulsa area and the Oklahoma City area. And I think Mike is correct. I think that the tendency has been for Oklahomans to be willing to vote for Republicans at the top of the ticket, and that has filtered down. And they've done a good job in recruiting candidates as well. That's certainly an issue.
Well, I think what makes this particular situation so interesting is that we have a legislature that is run largely by Democrats drawing lines to protect or not protect the Republican congressional delegation. And that just sets up for politics at its best or at its worst, don't you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. And I think the real conundrum, if I can use a big word, that we find ourselves...
We'll have a graphic on that next
Okay,
week.
thanks.
Yeah, that's right.
That we find ourselves in is having to move from 6 to 5. There's just no easy way to do it.
Right.
And there's going to be trauma, and there's going to be, I think, acrimony. I mean, it's a game of musical chairs, and at the end of the game, somebody's going to be left out. So that's unfortunate.
Hold that thought. Loyd, we'll start with you when we get back. We're going to take a short break. We're back. We're discussing congressional redistricting. What's your verdict?
Yeah, campfire's a lot of fun. You get to make some friends. You get to do some cool stuff. Campfire's for boys too, not just girls. But hey, campfire's definitely for kids. So call the campfire office nearest you to join in on the fun. Because let's face it, you're not getting any younger.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
Yesterday was plain awful.
You can say that again.
On Broadway is Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company.
Bringing our daughter here was one of the smartest things we've ever done.
I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of confidence. They help me develop talents I never knew I had.
And it's fun.
On Broadway, Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company. Now enrolling in Edmond. Call 330-CAST. That's 330-2278.
Every day, in state governments throughout the country, crucial decisions are being made that affect the lives of children and their families. But as this process takes place, children are often left voiceless. When these children raise their hands to be heard, is anyone listening? There are people listening. They are child advocates. Join us and raise your hand for kids.
And we're discussing the process of congressional redistricting. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers and our guest. Kent, where are we here?
Well, I wanted to ask the Speaker about the one-day special session. Seems like there's an awful lot of work to get done in one day. Is the legislature going to be able to get this done in one day?
Kent, what has to happen is there has to be some consensus built between the House and the Senate committees that a bill can be presented to the governor, and that bill almost has to be ready to go before the special session. And really, we haven't gotten to that point yet. So we'll really have to have 2 days because bills are only on third reading on each agenda or each calendar. So it'll take the second day to actually pass the conference committee report. But it's going to be difficult to get all that done.
Mr. Secretary, there's been widely reported in the news about you going to Washington with maps in your pocket to talk about congressional redistricting. What happened on that trip, and what did you learn on that trip, if anything, from our existing congressman?
Kent, part of my job as Secretary of State is to serve as the state's liaison to the congressional delegation. And another part of my job has been to be the governor's point person on redistricting, legislative and congressional. So I guess, wearing two hats when I went to Washington, and my objective was, as an honest broker, to try to get the delegation to focus on redistricting and to see if there was an opportunity to develop a consensus among the delegation on how the map would be redrawn. So we'd had a number of meetings actually prior to my visit with members of the delegation and had written and oral feedback on how different members thought the map ought to be redesigned. So it was frankly the last step on a work in progress, trying to get the delegation to, I guess, focus in a more serious way about their involvement in redistricting. And as a result of those meetings, we came up with a map which we felt was a synthesis of the views. Again, we're trying to reconcile 6 different perspectives on how the map ought to look. And I guess the thing that I regret was that it was widely reported as the governor's plan, and frankly, it was more of an effort to try to balance interests and come up with something that could represent the delegation's viewpoint on redistricting.
Well, I suspect that the delegation's viewpoint was not unanimous in how it ought to happen, but would you say that what you came up with was a substantial majority of the congressional consensus?
Well, I think every member had misgivings, and every member had areas of his district that he either lost or areas of other districts that he picked up that he wasn't happy with. But, I mean, the challenge was distasteful. How do you, again, go from 6 to 5? And how do you find a way to add people to every district? And Kent, every district had to pick up anywhere from 90 to 150,000 people. Mm-hmm. So everybody's district was going to look different. And I think several members hadn't really focused on the fact that whatever happened, their district was going to look dramatically different.
But Mike, I feel like in a way we're burying the lead here. The bottom line is that the governor's wife may be one of the incumbents that would be protected by the governor's plan, or the plan that's been called the governor's plan. Wouldn't it be best for the state of Oklahoma to not protect well, go from 6 to 5 and not protect all the incumbents?
Yeah, that's been raised, and I frankly have rejected that notion out of hand, because that was never a criteria for how the map was designed that we came up with. The most comprehensive input we got was from Congressman Istook. And Congressman Istook had two principles, basically, for redistricting, among a couple of other areas that he announced as what ought to be, guiding objectives for the process. They were that Tulsa County and Oklahoma County ought to be, as he put it, the prevalent force in 2 districts. And he even went on to define prevalent force as 65 to 75% of the population in 2 districts. So, I mean, we agreed, frankly, and I think a lot of the legislature agrees. And the map that we came up with, the new Central Oklahoma District, which in many ways combines the 4th and the 5th, 75% of the population in that district is Oklahoma County. You've got a larger percentage in Tulsa County. I mean, we were required, in order to make the numbers work, we were required to go into Tulsa County in a limited way to give Congressman Carson more people. But Tulsa and Oklahoma County, again, under the Istook principle, are the prevalent forces in 2 districts.
Well, your Central Oklahoma District, as we'll just call it for today's purposes, that would end up pitting Congressman Istook against Congressman Watts, would it not?
Under the current design.
Yeah. But now, go ahead.
I was going to say, we need to start wrapping it up. I'm going to give Mr. Benson a chance to sum up your thoughts and comment on anything you've heard here today.
And how's it going to come out?
Well, in about 40 seconds, I think one of the things that historically the congressional delegation has always had input in redistricting. In '91, the congressional districts were actually drawn by the existing congressman. I think what we tried to do, and we have a committee made up of 3 Republicans, 4 Democrats. We've met with every congressional delegation. We've asked them for their input. We've asked them to give us what your plan is. I think that's what Secretary Hunter was trying to do, is tell us what you all think is most feasible from your standpoint. So we have sought that information. Going from 6 to 5 makes it very difficult, but we've really had no consensus as we did in '91 when we had that presentation that was presented to us. So I think that Mike did exactly what we were trying to do as well, is trying to get some kind of a consensus. But when you try to increase every district from 540,000 to 690,000, you're increasing every district by 150,000 population, it becomes difficult. We talked about gerrymandering. It becomes very difficult to gerrymander when you've got to add that many people to a district. So I think when you look at the principles, the compactness, commonality of interest, no diversity, no deviations for its population, boundaries based upon highways, rivers, whatever, trying to keep the integrity of political subdivisions and counties together, becomes a real difficult issue.
Mike, the final 30 seconds belong to you.
Thanks. Like Speaker Benson, I'm not optimistic that we can get this issue resolved in 1 day or even 2 days. I frankly don't think the map that the congressional delegation came up with, and there are still dissenting voices that relate to that, I don't think the map is going to look dramatically different from that. The options are just very limited. You're going to have to completely redesign and disrupt a lot of those integrities of interest that Speaker Benson talked about if you change the map much. So I look for the map to be very similar to the one that the delegation had input into. But as you know, with the Oklahoma legislature, anything can happen.
Thanks for coming.
I might point out that my legislative district would have 3 different congressmen under that plan.
And that'll be it. We'll be right back.
Hello, Hello, my name is Ted Smith. I'm president of the board of directors of the Oklahoma Disability Law Center. ODLC provides free legal services in civil matters to people with physical and mental disabilities.
I'm Mike Sykes, Vice President of ODLC. For more information, call 1-800-880-7755.
The Oklahoma Disability Law Center provides high-quality legal services to people with physical and mental disabilities.
Boy Scouts of America, where above all else, character counts.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities, parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
Can't wrap this one up for us.
We're going to have a fight. It's going to be fun. The music is playing. The people are walking around the chairs. And who's going to be left standing? Is it going to be Watts, Took, Carson, Lucas, or Watkins? Let us know what you think. Let us know at the verdict on at our website, www.theverdict.tv. See you next week.
And so long. This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma.